Where are your kids going to school? This is a question that every time I go to the masjid and we meet new people, we ask, where are your kids going to school? The reality is, schooling is a pretty big decision. At least for a parent, it's one that I, for one, sometimes stress out about because it can mean a lot of things. For starters, the environment that your kid is going to spend the most time in, it probably will influence the kind of friends that they might make, the type of education they will be receiving and what they're exposed to. And not only that, I mean, there's so many different models: homeschooling, private schooling, public schooling. And added to that is real estate value. Yes, even real estate value. I mean, when you're shopping for a home, you think, oh my goodness, school district. So look, there's a lot of things wrapped up into this, but the bottom line question is, what should I be thinking about as I'm making a decision about schooling for my kids? Now, to answer this question, today we are blessed to have Dr. Amaarah DeCuir. Now, Dr. Amaarah DeCuir has spent her entire career in education. She is a doctor of education and part of the faculty at American University. Now, alhamdulillah, I've actually crossed paths with Dr. Amaarah at a knowledge sharing event and was absolutely enamored with the amount of experience and breadth of experience she's had between public schools and private schools, in academia, out of academia. And I'm really excited to welcome her into our conversation. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Amaarah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So good to be here.
The pleasure is mine. Now, Dr. Amaarah, when I set this conversation up, I talked about being stressed. It's like, oh my goodness, how am I going to, I'm stressed out. Do you think that decision of schooling is an important decision?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I think it's important. And if we look at the larger broad description of what stress is, right? Stress is this intense feeling that keeps you on your toes, that makes you pay very close attention. It doesn't always have to be negative. Stress can be very positive. I think making these decisions and being a part of this process on behalf of your children is stressful, but it's stressful for parents who know that this is important. And that's why I like leaning into these type of conversations, because it allows us to speak about parenting and schooling.
I appreciate that. And also, that was kind of a compliment too, because you're like, only parents that care are stressed. So that means that, maybe because I'm stressed, it at least shows that I care. Now, Dr. Amaarah, I want to ask you, like, before we go into different types of models and things like this, what do you see as some of like the common mistakes people make in approaching this decision?
All right. So you want to start with common mistakes, huh? All right.
And I think the reason why I like approaching with common mistakes is because sometimes knowing what not to do is a great way to figure out, well, what should I be doing?
Yeah. Well, okay, let's take one mistake. The way we set this up in the intro, right? Like one of the top questions that's asked of parents of school-age children in the masjid space is, where are your children going to school? And I think that question and the framing of that question is one of our community's number one mistakes, because it causes the person who's asking the question to approach this family as if their answer is going to reveal some deep, dark motivation about their parenting. It is also going to reveal some hidden message that is going to come through in the way the family describes where their child is going to school. And I think the problem is that the question implies that school decision making is a neutral process, that all of our families approach this in the same way, or even that all of the children in a particular family have this schooling decision approached in the same way. And that's frankly not true. For many families, choosing how their children attend school and where their children attend school is deeply personal, and it's not meant to communicate a broad message about their parenting. One, Muslim parents are parents of children with disabilities. And for some of our families, choosing a school for their child is an act of finding an environment where their child is going to thrive and
Mm,
be seen as an individual and be able to make positive experiences with learning and peers. For some of our children in our families, they have a certain need that needs to be tapped. Maybe it's a specific gift or talent or challenge that the child is presenting with. And a particular school is able to nurture and provide resources to support those gifts, talents, or maybe challenges or obstacles. But then the other reality that I would want to bring to this discussion is privilege. Because for many people, when they approach a family and ask, where are you sending your child to school? There's an understanding that the family has choice. And that choice is not shared equally across Muslims in our society here in America, frankly, excuse me, and even Muslims across the globe. So I think that our number one mistake is thinking that we're going to read messages in the answers of how parents may ask this question.
I really appreciate that. What I heard you say, Dr. Amaarah, is, at a high level, two critical things. Number one is, when you think about schooling, the right type of schooling depends on a whole lot of factors. And it's not even just family to family. It could even be child to child, given their own unique circumstances. And then number two, also being cognizant of the fact that, like, if we're even having this discussion, there is an element of being thankful of the idea that we even have the opportunity to decide on where we send our kids to school, because many kids don't. I'll tell you, I remember when I was a child, my dad worked 3 jobs to move to the house that I'm actually currently living in now, such that we could go to a school district that they had like a gifted and talented program. And it was so taxing on him to be able to provide that for our family. And alhamdulillah, I don't appreciate enough that decision that he made, because I think for my brother, sister, and I, that actually made a big difference in our upbringing. So I want to shift gears just a little bit here. So, Dr. Amaarah, you said that, look, there is no one right form of schooling.
Absolutely.
So you're saying that Islamic schools aren't the right option, Dr. Amaarah? No, I'm kidding. I'm being I'm being a little bit,
No, let's bring it. All of our children are different, right? Even within one family, children present differently. And so I think, going back to your other question, what do families often do wrong? Is think that at the very beginning of moving from couplehood to a family, that they're going to have some broad conversation about a schooling plan for all of the children before even the children present themselves in this world. Or even as the children present themselves in this world, thinking that we're going to have one single plan that is going to last for that child from preschool through their college years. So I think as parents, what we need to do is see each of our children as individual learners and be able to consider, what does each child need? And at the same time, be able to think, what can the family provide? Because as you're mentioning, and I appreciate you sharing your family's story, many families, when they're in a position to make choices, finances are part of those choices, and finances contribute to the stability of a family. So when families are making decisions about school for the children, they need to also be able to consider what they're able to provide, right? And know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides the risk, the sustenance, the resources for all of us to care for our children in the best way that we can. So caring for our children's school age choices should not put the family in any type of budgetary challenge. But For those who are privileged to be able to choose public school, Islamic school, homeschooling, there are ways that we can do this correctly, right? By centering the needs of our children, by looking at the larger context of our family, looking at our abilities, looking and being flexible about changing as our children grow and change. And that's where I think it becomes exciting to lean into the beautiful range of possibilities that so many of us now have in our communities.
So, Dr. Amar, I want to dig a little bit deeper
Hmm.
because philosophically, this idea that each of our children are individual learners and they learn differently, I get that. Okay, sure, I accept that. But in terms of practical application, like, help me understand, so I have Kauthar, who's, child number one. I have Qasim, who's child number two. In what circumstances might one schooling method be good for one and not good for the other?
Well, let's lean into some practicalities. For many of us in our Muslim communities, there's one local Muslim school. Now, some are so fortunate as there are multiple Muslim schools and they're able to make choices. But for many Muslims, particularly in America, there's one local Muslim school that may be available to them and to their family.
Yep.
So let's say your family makes the decision that we want an Islamic centered approach for our children from the get go, from preschool and early elementary. And we want this decision because we want our children to be able to see the world through an Islamic lens. We want them to read and learn to read by attaching reading to seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We want them to engage in science and math and construction and art, all with the focus of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through their academic growth and endeavors. Having that frame of how you want your young people to come into knowledge, to be able to see themselves and their interactions with their world from an Islamic frame is one key element of a Muslim school, one key driver. And that driver might work beautifully for your first child, might not work well for the second child for some logistic reasons with the school, maybe some additional complications with scheduling. Who knows what may happen as the second child comes into their school age years? So it may not necessarily be that the school environment or the school structure is not the best learning environment for each of the children, but it may be technical realities that don't allow the child to receive all of the learning resources they need from that one particular school. And if we're
Mm.
going to start speaking about our Muslim schools, it could be a Muslim school. But you could make the similar consideration for a public school, that a public school may present with different opportunities and resources that benefit and support the children as they're growing through their school age years. But then one of the children in the family presents with a need and a desire and a talent that can't be met within that local public school. And so a family makes a decision to choose another option. So it may not be claiming that one school setting is better or worse than another, one school setting is valid or invalid. It's simply responding to the needs and the priorities of our children as they grow.
Interesting. So what I heard you say was first, as a parent, there is a layer that is almost strategic, right? To say, hey, do I want my child to grow up with a Islamic worldview, this lens, this filter through which to, discover the world? Okay, if so, then perhaps I look at Islamic school. Now, even when we go there, then there's another layer that is thinking about, well, my own individual child. Say, for example, my child is really over indexing on arts and creativity and theater. Well, does that school have the capability and resources to nurture that? If so, awesome. If not, maybe we, find a different school that has that capability to nurture that. I have a friend of mine, Muhammad, who I was just hanging out with the other night, and he mentioned, my son was in public school. It's a great public school, like, it's, rated highly, but he's very good at math. And when I was a kid, the schools that I went to, they had like a little they had like this gifted and talented program. So you'd like put them in there and they might be able to nurture that. Well, this school didn't have that. And so they ended up moving him to another school that actually it didn't have as high a rating. Like I didn't have as high a like 0 to 10 rating, which I'm obsessing over because I'm looking at real estate right now. But it actually ended up being much better for his child because they had the program that would nurture his child's needs. And so I think I really hear you on that. Now, so broad brushstrokes, when you think about public schools specifically, let's talk about public schools first. What are some of the questions that as a parent I should be asking to evaluate whether this public school is right for me or my family?
So I love having this conversation. This is actually the site of my research. I'm doing a research study now on Muslim student experiences in public school. And I think that approaching the question, how do I evaluate this school? How do I consider this school may not be the best way that we need to approach considering public school. For many of our families, public school is the standard. It's the status quo. It's the default plan because there may not be a Muslim school that is available or accessible. There may not be the opportunity to homeschool. It may not be accessible to them. So public school becomes a default. I think that parents, as they approach sending their child to public school, whether it's for elementary, middle, or high school, the question is, what can I do to allow this public school environment to be meaningful and supportive and affirming for my Muslim child? Take your friend Muhammad. It may be that I need to complement the public school with some add-on extracurricular activities in theater and performing arts if the public school doesn't provide that. But we're in a Muslim space. It could be that the public school is not providing an Islamic worldview. It can't. By default, it's a public school. So
Correct.
it may be that the parent needs to provide a vibrant youth group environment for their child to engage with other Muslim peers outside of the public school space. It could be that we as parents need to push into the public school with volunteering and supporting and offering our services in the public school so that our presence is known and seen and made visible in a school. So I think for many parents, when they approach considering public school for their child, they should be able to lean in and think, what can I do to make this work for my child? And I can tell you from the early findings of my research, many Muslim students are doing very well in the public school because they're coming from families who are supporting them and affirming their identity. They come in communities where the community is wrapping around support that feels meaningful to these young people. And I will say, I'm blessed here in Northern Virginia, where in many of our public schools, our young people do not feel like they're going to school as the only Muslim. And
Mm,
so having a peer group in the public school is making the public school experience accessible for more of our Muslim students to
it's
be able to
interesting.
come through with their identity and their academics intact.
It's interesting you say that because um, in initial work that we had done related to this concept called a community of practice, which we can talk about later, but actually I'll just define it because I said community of practice and people are like, what is that? Okay, so community of practice is basically, if you were to sum like total, all of the kind of social interactions that a child would have. Okay, so this includes, who comes over on Friday and Saturday night, like who my child, does karate with, who does my child, have in his Sunday school class. This kind of becomes my child's community. And as a parent, it might be difficult to decide exactly who your child's best friends are, but we can actually shape who their community of practice is by making some of these decisions: karate, soccer, hivs, whatever that might be. Now, one of the ideas that is often presented is in the development of identity and developing confidence in identity, oftentimes people who have a more diverse community of practice can build more confidence. So what does that mean, right? Like when I was in Wayzata school district, I was like the only Muslim in a sea of white people. Compared to when I was in Brooklyn Center, I was one of very few Muslim people, but my peers were Black and Asian and Hispanic and white. And being different actually wasn't all that different. It was easier to feel like I could belong. And so I guess I'm curious, Dr. Amaarah, did you find that like in your research, I guess, like does diversity and the diversity of a school district help a Muslim child feel comfortable in their own skin?
Absolutely, it helps a Muslim child feel comfortable in their own skin for a few tangible reasons. The teachers in those spaces typically have additional professional development of how to approach multicultural education. And so our students would then benefit from educators with that level of training and awareness. If an educator is teaching in a diverse school or a diverse district, they come with those capacities and those knowledges. That benefits our young people. And then, as you're saying, the peer group, right? If the peer group is comfortable building bridges across difference, then our young people are going to benefit from that. But I've also seen young people thriving in communities where they are more of a minority population. And I've seen students who are in a very diverse space whose identity um, begins to waver because they lose themselves because the community of practice is not wrapping around them with a strong affirmative Muslim identity. So yes, diversity is important, but parents should also continue to create a strong Islamic foundation for their young people in any environment where your young person is going to be experiencing the majority of their day, like school.
So it's interesting. So Dr. Amaro, like in a nutshell, what I heard you say was Muslim kids can do just fine in public school, but parents have agency. Parents kind of have a role to play in making sure that the child has a strong foundation and maybe that they also like supplement school with other things. And that might mean me as dad or mom, like come on the field trip as a volunteer or get involved in the PTO, and that type of thing. Is that, am I hearing you right?
Yes, but what I will also name is this is very much building specific. There are Muslim students who are being harmed in our public schools. And I'm not speaking solely about physical harm, I'm speaking about academic harm, social and emotional harm, where our young people are not thriving in a public school space because it is not affirming, it is destroying their identity. They are not thriving. I'm saying that public school can be accessible to our Muslim students and that there's a role that parents need to play and there's a role that the masjid needs to play, the masjid leadership and the resources that they allocate for youth group and youth development. Young people cannot navigate public school on their own. Public school is a reflection of our larger society, and our larger society is not supportive of Muslim identities. So there's work that we need to do in order to create space for our young people to be Muslim in a public school space. And we
Public,
need to
yeah.
be we need to be ready to lean into that hard work as a community, irregardless of where our children go to school, irregardless of whether we have children or not. All of us live in a community, and that community has a public school where somebody's children are attending.
Public school is a reflection of our greater society as a whole. I think that's a really um, powerful reflection. I want to dial in now because let's not talk about community level for this specific discussion. Let's talk about parents. So, what are things that parents of students in public school could be doing to support their children?
One, we need to be listening. Some of the students in my study are sharing that they wish that their parents knew what they were experiencing in school, and that they wish that their parents understood that school is not the same as what their parents had experienced. And this is irregardless of whether their parents went to school in another country or in America. I went to school in America, but the schools of today are not the schools of the 80s where I was growing up by any stretch of the imagination.
I mean, social media alone.
Absolutely. And so, one thing that parents need to do is they need to be able to listen. And listening has to be strategic, right? It's not necessarily calling for a meeting with your child every day and asking for a debrief of the school day. There needs to be a more meaningful, more informal, and more consistent way of being present and being available to our young people. And the second is we need to have information outside of just from our young person. We need to be present in the school. We need to be a part of the football games. We need to be a part of the PTA. We need to be a part of the field trips. We need to understand how our young people are experiencing school so that our level of familiarity can increase. And then we're able to better advocate and champion the needs of our young people in our public schools. And by all means, especially the way that we see our schools today, volunteer, run for local office, get on the school board, take charge. We are part of this local community, and the local community thrives on local leadership. So let's lean in and be parents that our children need us to be.
Thank you for this. And um, there's so much I would want to add to this idea of parent engagement, but for the sake of time, I want to shift gears just a little bit. In my mind, I have this attitude that if I send my kids to public school, maybe they're going to go astray. I'm going to lose them. TikTok will take them away from me. But if they go to Islamic school, I will be saved. My kids will not experience any harm. Of course, that's a generalization, but I think many parents have this attitude. I wonder, like in broad brushstrokes, would you agree?
I think that it is true that this is a deep seated concern and fear that parents have. And it's rooted in deep knowledge. We were all young ourselves. We've all been teenagers before we were parents. We've all been children before we were teenagers. And so for many of us, this act of parenting our school age children brings up deep personal memories of what we experienced. And for some of us, what we hope our children don't have to experience. But I think that for the parent who is leaning into a public school option, we should not be fearful of TikTok. We should not be fearful of social media. What we need to do is to provide space for our young person to be Muslim in their public school. And the first advice I would say is help your child to be able to pray. If you can have a space and an ability and an understanding that your child is maintaining prayer, Dhuhr prayer and Asr during the school day, that is a big win for a public school child. And for a child who's attending an Islamic school, where we may take for granted that they're pausing during the school day to pray, what we need to do is ask our young people how they are understanding the deen, how they are taking the deen and applying it in their real life to treat their classmates, to treat their teacher, and to grow their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to have those conversations at the dinner table. We cannot leave the raising of our young people to the educators in our Muslim school. Our Muslim school educators need us to partner in that effort.
In our research related to identity development, what we discovered was the single most important variable that impacts a child's understanding of who they are is not, where they live, how close they live to the masjid, which school they go to, but rather the quality of the relationship they have with their mother and father, their parents, and also the role model that those parents lead for them. Dr. Amaarah, you said we have to teach our kids to be Muslim in their public school. Well, as a parent, we have to start with making sure that we feel comfortable being Muslim in the public. And if we can role model that unapologetically for our children and start there, I myself, when I'm at work, quote unquote, I mean, now we're, all at home, but like, do I like make time and say, hey, look, I need a place for me to pray? Am I comfortable, bringing my whole authentic self to my workplace? Because if I'm asking my child to bring his or her authentic self to school, I should feel comfortable doing that on my own terms as well. And I really appreciate what you mentioned there. Now, Dr. Amaarah, we started going down this thread of Islamic schools. And what we've, you know, shared is that, well, through an Islamic school, inshallah, we are able to help our kids learn through an Islamic lens. And what I also heard you say was, well, parents have to know that you can't just outsource Islamic education. You have to be a partner in that process. I wonder, what are some of the concerns about Islamic schools that people may not, think about readily, or should, be aware of as they're making that decision, if they do to go to Islamic school?
What are some of the concerns? I think that parents often come to an Islamic school concerned that their child is going to miss out on academics, miss out on an opportunity to be in a diverse environment, miss out on the ability to articulate a Muslim identity in a largely not Muslim American context. But as a strong champion of our American Muslim schools and Muslim schools broadly, internationally, I think that many of these concerns are simply don't hold up. Academically, many of our Muslim schools are doing very well by our young people. And we don't simply measure this by standardized test scores. We measure this by students' ability to thrive and see themselves as learners, lifelong learners, and have the ability to read and compute and create like their same age peers. Um, I am involved in many teacher training efforts for American Muslim school educators, and they bring excellence. They bring best practices to their work. I think that our Muslim schools do have diversity within the building. There is not just one way to be Muslim, and there sure isn't one way to be Muslim in America. So, walking into American Muslim schools often invites people to see a beautiful array of diversity that they may not have understood takes
Mashallah.
place within a building of ours.
Mashallah, I completely agree, and I'll tell you, even with the work that we did with more kids, when we started in 2011, we we had a Facebook group of 50 parents from around North America who like opted in to say they were interested in putting together this, Muslim Children, at the time it was a magazine. And what we discovered was, Muslims, I mean, they're not Pakistani, they're not Egyptian, they're not Black, they're not white. I mean, they're all of the above. They're actually very diverse. And there's something incredibly beautiful in this rich diversity that we have. And I appreciate you shared that. Now, I want to ask then, say, for example, I'm making the decision or evaluating a Islamic school. Are there some things or questions you would ask or types of information you would seek to ascertain to identify, like, whether essentially a factor to consider? What question should I be asking to know whether a school is like good for me?
One, you would want to ask, can I visit? can I see teaching and learning taking place in the classroom? And you want to be able to walk into a school and be able to feel welcomed. Because if you do not feel welcomed when you walk into the school, it is not likely that your child is going to feel welcomed in that space if they were a student there. You're going to want to walk into a classroom and see teachers teaching, and you're going to want to see students enjoying learning. And you'll be able to see that if you see smiles on their faces, if you see them sitting at the edge of their seat in their learning activity, whatever it is that they might be engaged with. You want to be able to sit with the school leader and have a strong conversation about how they make education decisions. You want to know that the decisions that they make for their school are rooted in both Islamic best practices and our education best practices. And when a parent knows what their child needs, you have raised this child from birth to age 3, birth to 5, birth to 15, even as you're choosing a school for your child. Trust your gut that you know your child and see if you could see your child thriving in that space. Trust that if your child is learning and being and doing what they need to do as Muslims, you may have found a beautiful gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your local Muslim school.
Mashallah. I really appreciate that. Here, I thought, Dr. Amaarah, you were going to say, well, pull up their Iowa test reports to see. No, none of that. Don't look at the score. Visit the school.
Visit the
Allahu
school.
Akbar. I really appreciate that. And I think it's an excellent framework to kind of use. And by the way, I don't think that's limited to Islamic schools. That's probably a similar framework that could be used when evaluating a public school, when you're going. The other key note that I want to make sure I mention is sometimes with respect to schooling, there can be a feeling that, and it makes the decision more weighty because we feel like it's a terminal decision. Once I decide this, that's it.
Oh, glad you mentioned that.
When in fact, if one environment doesn't work out, you can switch and try something new. There's nothing wrong with that until you find one that is right. Now, we don't have very much time left, and I want to ask about something that you mentioned before. Schooling, but there's also like enrichment programs, karate, theater, hifz. Can you talk a little bit about how that can supplement traditional schooling, and in your view, how important or unimportant those decisions are?
Absolutely. One, remind ourselves again, when we're thinking about these as options for our family, we have to be able to express gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the privilege of even considering extracurricular options for our young people. It should never bring our family into debt. It should never cause a member of the parenting team to be exhausted with the driving. It should not be done to slight the youngest children in the family. You know, imagining yourself driving your eldest child to karate daily, if it requires the infant to be toted around in a car seat daily, it may not be the best decision for your family at that time. So lean into your children's interests, nurture their interests, and feel free, just as you said a moment ago, to be able to change and grow as our children change and grow. But I definitely think that when we are in a position to supplement our child's learning with learning experiences beyond the school day, many of our children thrive and come into awareness of new interests and passions that they may not have been introduced to in the context of the school day.
Well, Dr. Amaarah, there's so much more I'd love to chat with you about. When you talk about these extracurriculars, oh my goodness, Kuman. I feel like everyone in our neighborhood, they're all talking about Kuman. Then I get insecure. Well, I don't really want to go to Kuman. Is my kid gonna now fall behind? Anyways, I think that's a conversation for a later day. But I want to thank you so much, Dr. Amaarah, for joining us on this wonderful conversation related to schooling. And I'm confident that everyone in our community is going to benefit from it. Now, Dr. Amaarah, if folks would like to learn more about your work or connect with you, or perhaps as a Islamic school, invite you to join them for a teacher training event, how do people get in touch with you?
That's great. I'm on Twitter at Amaarah_DeCuir. I teach at American University, and my profile and my email address are all on the American University website. I look forward to staying in touch with your listenership, and I would hope that we can continue this conversation in the future.
Inshallah. And all of Dr. Amaarah's information is going to be on the show notes of this podcast. And with that, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Amaarah.
Thank you.